The key question is, what is the observer?
What is the observer?
What is
Not who?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the old jokes is, who's the observer? Is it your father? Was his father the observer before? Is it passed down
Yeah.
It's a weird way in which you're talking technically, and then you say this thing that's like, then the observer makes an observation and a measurement, and you're thinking, how did a human get into that story?
I am very excited because, we were talking. We've been good friends for a long time. And this guy who has this YouTube channel said Eric Weinstein is groundbreaking with his theory of everything. And I know you've been working on this quietly. We've talked about it. But this is kind of the first time you've been publicly acknowledged. And before we get into anything, I will say that the physics community, I don't know about the math community, but the physics community is high school politics. I mean, the amount of sort of like, his theories, got holes in it. I mean, I wouldn't really take it seriously. There's just so much back and forth, and there's so much disagreement.
No, there isn't.
There isn't?
No.
No? Okay.
No. Please. I mean, it's in fact very interesting that very often what you get is a small number of views that get amplified. Right? And so, it's a little bit the same thing with like what journalists do, is that a journalist will frame a story and then you'll watch the entire world see that thing through that frame. Mm-hmm. Right? Or, if I were to tell you, I don't know, like a tell in somebody's speech, and I said, every time he says twice, he's thinking about that guy he killed in the parking lot. And then suddenly the guy says and everybody has, he's doing it again. People are really bored, and they're not actually dialed in or plugged in. So one of the things that I find fascinating is that the physics community has to figure out why it's not listening to anything other than, in deepest research, quantum gravity research, and in particular, one theory of quantum gravity above all, which has had 40 years to ship a product and cannot. And that's something called M theory or string theory. And the big sin in physics is that you've got a theory that has no rightful claim on being the only game in town, protected by this massive, sort of inexplicable support from, traditional media and from universities that write these press releases that any one of us would be embarrassed if our research, were described that way. So you find somebody's just done research in string theory, and you bring up the press release that's lauding it, and that person says, yeah, it's the university. I can't stop them. They have to hype it. So there's a very weird situation in which I don't even think we're having a physics conversation. I think that physics at its deepest level is almost dead.
Really?
Yeah. But
so string theory has nothing to show for itself?
I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay. But you're saying that they were the ball hogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that.
And anybody who had an alternative theory was kind of like side-eyed and pushed out of the game.
Let's imagine that you had one team in the NBA, okay, that was different. And it was called the referees. And the referees dressed in vertical black and white stripes and carried whistles around their necks. And they were the only people allowed to adjudicate their own games.
Yeah.
That's sort of the situation with string theory, is that it's the appearance of a new team, a new kind of doing physics called the referees. And if you play them, you have to deal with their refereeing of your game against them.
Because they will attack you. What?
They got control of sort of refereeing who's up and who's down.
But how do they do that? So Michio Kaku or any of these string theorists, they get the bulk of the grants? What is it that they're doing to keep other theories at
Well, first of all, my feeling about this is one of the things that they're doing is happening right here, right now.
So I'm not a big supplement guy, but I've been drinking Vinia coffee and Vinia tea. What is that? Basically, Vinia is a compound made from red grapes. Sounds crazy, right? But check this out. It is clinically proven to improve blood flow. Basically, Vinia is basically a circulation superfood backed by real science, all right? You've got 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. That's enough to wrap around the moon, okay? And your circulation system is like a highway system. And right now, a lot of people are stuck in traffic, okay? So Vinia contains a powerful polyphenol found in red grapes that boosts your nitric oxide levels. And nitric oxide is what helps your blood vessels dilate. And Vinia, check this out, Vinia is clinically proven to increase that dilation by up to 70%, all right? And you can check with anybody you want. That is a good thing. So the folks at Vinia are offering a 90-day risk-free trial. If you don't feel the difference in physical energy and mental sharpness, they will refund every penny and even cover the return postage. Here's the best news. Visit Vinia.com/Callen to get Vinia's special buy two, get 1 month free offer. Now for about $1 a day, you too can experience Vinia's proven results, plus get 10% off any Vinia purchase when you click the link in the description. So go to Vinia, VINIA.com/Callen. I've been taking it. I've been drinking the tea. I've been drinking the coffee, and I love it. All I got to hear is clinically proven, and I'm in, especially if it increases your nitric oxide levels. Either way, with all those blood vessels, I want dilation. And once again, Vinia is clinically proven to increase that dilation by 70%. So check it out. Hit me in the comment section. Let me know what you think. I'm curious. I want to know. So far, I'm loving it. So there it is. Vinia.com/Callen. And now back to the podcast.
We're not having a discussion about physics. We're having a discussion about sociology. And we're having a discussion with them at the center. So your first point is that this guy, Kurt Jiongal, released a 3-hour, I don't know what you call it, there's no precedent for it, a documentary on my theory. And immediately we're talking about, well, what does the community say about it? The community is back and forth. No, it really isn't. More or less, the community has ignored it for 40 years. And we're talking about it from the point of view of why is that? And it's a human thing. So instead of talking about the cool stuff that we should be talking about, which is what does the theory say that's insane? And why do you think it's true? And what do you think the support for it is? We're having a discussion about the sociology of peer review and refereeing and how fields get captured by dominant groups who can't produce. And so I'm just saying that whatever it is that they do, they've made everything about them. So I'm happy to come back to that because I think it's super interesting.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind, did you see this video? What did you make of it?
I wanted to let you, I don't make anything of it because I don't know enough. I guess what I would ask is this about that video. What was it that he saw in that video that caused him to make that video? What was it about? Because I know you had met him, but what was the, because you've explained your theory of everything to me in layman's terms over dinner a couple of times, but
never without alcohol.
Never without alcohol. Some good red and white wine, sir. And might I had some excellent food, whether it's via Veneto or Scopa. But can you tell me, did he tell you what that eureka moment was for him where he went, I haven't heard this before.
Oh, this was crazy. He rings me up or sends me a WhatsApp message, something. And he says, hey, if you have a little bit of time, there's something I really want to show you. So we get on a Zoom call and he takes control of my screen and then he starts showing me his understanding of my theory. And it's been very strange because for 40 years, more or less, I've been inside my own head. And I have the opportunity to sort of break out little bits of the theory, but more or less nobody has an attention span. Imagine you're trying to tell somebody about the ring cycle, right? And they're
You're
like,
pretty good at it, though. You do teach me some things.
well, this is the thing. Like, what the hell's wrong with everybody? It's funny. Imagine working on one thing for 4 decades and not being able to get people to sort of grasp what it is that you're proposing.
Yeah.
It's, I don't think there's a parallel in most lives, and I believe it's totally consequential. I think when Elon Musk talks about going to Mars, he doesn't really want to go to Mars. Nobody smart wants to go to the moon or Mars as a humanity diversifying thing. I think he thinks that that's motivating to engineers. What he really wants to do is to go interstellar. And that's why he says ad astra. And it's confusing because no chemical rocket company is going to get humans interstellar.
What is the difference?
So if the nearest star is 4 light years away and you go the fastest humans have ever gone, I think it takes you 100,000 years to get there, and recorded history is pretty brief. So, no chance you're going to do it on a generation ship. Yeah. And then you find out there's nothing to do with the first star.
Yeah.
Everything is very far away.
Yeah.
And, my take on this is that this is hugely consequential. We don't recognize that everything is decided ultimately by the final layer, which is some version of math or physics. So my feeling, and this is the reason that there's a heaviness about me, it's not that I enjoy talking about depressing stuff. As you know, we like talking about wine and music and dance and art and all sorts of things. If we don't get out of here and diversify onto many planets, I don't see long-term survival of our species. And that means everything you love about this place, from mangoes to Mozart, is under the control of a tiny number of human beings who should not have nuclear and biological weapons. So I was just over the moon that somebody finally, put in this kind of work. And it's not like I agree with everything that he said, but it's clear that he understands a great deal of what it is that I'm saying more than anyone else.
That's amazing. And he's a physicist, or he's a layman physicist, I think.
He's clearly got some technical background. And
what's his name?
Kurt Jiongal.
Kurt Jiongal.
And his channel is called...
Shout out to Kurt.
Yeah, Theories of Everything. And the genesis of this is that he and I wound up at this conference called ARC that Jordan Peterson, I think, asked me to come to. And I wasn't speaking, so I was spending time just talking to people. And Kurt was there, and we were sitting in the lobby. And he says, "What's going on, man? Like, I never really understood your theory." And I said, "Well, in part, we've stopped asking the really big questions in physics. Everything has become a question about, do you have a renormalizable theory of gravity, which is not the main issue in physics at all." And I said, the old questions are, why are there 3 generations of particles? Why is there 3 copies of matter? Think about it as plastic, wood, and metal. Every particle comes in 3 varieties of Lego, if you will. Why is nature left-right asymmetric? Because the weak force knows it's left from its right when the other forces don't. Why are there 16 particles in a generation? Why do they have the properties they do? These are the old problems that before 1984 everybody viewed as the problems in physics. And then mysteriously in the mid-1980s, one individual completely reoriented the field. And
Is this Ed Witten?
This is Ed Witten, yeah. And everybody who came up afterwards is sort of unaware that physics changed character. It's just a discrete. You remember when in Bewitched, Darren gets replaced by become like Dick York and Dick Sargent. They're 2 different actors who were playing, and there's no comment that something changed.
Yeah.
That's
right. I remember that. Yes.
Right. It's very disturbing.
Yes.
So
nothing to see here.
Nothing. What? Right.
I think the original guy got sick.
Maybe,
yeah.
But just to not comment on it. So the whole field changed character and became incapable. And
what a great analogy.
And so what I I don't know where that came from.
But string theory never spoke to you. Did you ever learn about string theory? Do you have a rudimentary or pretty intermediate understanding of string theory,
when it came out? It's a funny, bizarre story, which is that I changed my major in college from physics to math to avoid this thing, and I did not know. So the problem is that I clearly do this change in my major between my freshman and I think in my sophomore year. But it's as a response to something that hadn't happened yet. So I have a time inconsistency problem in my origin story because the great breakthrough in string theory happens in 1984 called the Green-Schwarz anomaly cancellation. And Ed Witten gets very involved in this immediately afterwards and gives a talk at Penn. And that talk convinces me that the physics community is about to collapse, like leaving Afghanistan to the Afghan army, and the Taliban is just instantly overruns everything.
And in the sense that this is the new blood and everything you've learned up till there is a lie or not true?
Just he gave one lecture at Penn that was so completely bewildering and brilliant and so confident, where he just told us everything that you've ever worried about. Here it is in string theory. It's in this line. It's in this term, et cetera, et cetera.
You once took a piece of paper at dinner and wrote an equation down, and that was Ed Witten's explanation of the universe.
That may have been the string action, but the problem was that this happens later than I changed my major. And so one day I'm reading a book by a guy named Peter Voigt called Not Even Wrong. I'm on the toilet, and I've never really told the story about changing my major in response to Ed Witten because it's time inconsistent. It sort of reveals that I'm not telling the truth. And I see in the book it says, Witten's first lecture in string theory actually was before the Green-Schwarz cancellation and was delivered at a grand unification workshop. And I said, oh my God, tell me that this didn't happen in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. At the University of Pennsylvania at a conference organized by Paul Steinhardt. And I thought, oh my God, I accidentally, as a 17-year-old kid, was in the audience of Ed Witten's first string theory lecture before the flood, just totally by accident. And I see this thing.
Were you able to follow it at 17?
I was able to follow the fact that he paralyzed the entire auditorium. One individual made everyone.
All physicists, probably.
Everyone was terrified of this human being. Nobody had seen something give a lecture like this. God. This was not human.
Jesus.
Right? And so you've got the 6'4",
strange
awkward,
guy, very tuxedo, kind of like that.
Well, yeah. Right.
Just a brilliant guy, but he talks.
I appreciate your attempts to understand the theory of the universe, but I find your intellect wanting.
He's the kind of guy who laughs behind his fingers. It's like any grown man is like.
Well, look, I don't want to make fun of the affectations, no. But he's been very aggressive. And the thing that he's really aggressive about that I can't stand and won't stand for is that he says that there are no other theories.
He says that?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Like you can check out a podcast called The Universe Speaks in
Numbers. Does he think he is Einstein? That's my little joke to the layman because Einstein was very cocky, but keep going.
What?
Einstein was kind of arrogant.
He
said if light doesn't bend, God's wrong. Something like that. I don't remember. Sorry.
There's not enough alcohol for this conversation.
I can't believe you're not writing the stuff I'm saying down.
Yeah.
Go on. I dig ours.
So Witten was on this podcast called The Universe Speaks in Numbers. And he's asked, well, were you ever tempted by other approaches? He says, I don't even know what you mean by other approaches. So the host is sort of flummoxed and throws some things out. He says, those aren't other approaches. Those are only words. There's just string theory. Everything else is just words. And I'm just like thinking, maybe you got sick the first day they taught remedial scientific ethics. You can't do that as a leader of a field. You're not allowed to declare victory like that.
Right. especially when there's nothing to show for it.
Well,
right?
Again, there's mathematics to show for it. But again, here we are talking about strings. And it'll keep happening, right? And whether it's you or me, it doesn't matter. It was woven into the story. So in order to get back to actual physics, we have to unweave the story of Ed Witten.
And this is what Jai was saying about your theory of everything, wasn't it? Jiongal, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think what he said at the end was, he said something that would be embarrassing for me to say, but I could play it for you to give you an idea of what his assessment.
I'd like you to play it for me.
All right. So let me just say that this is more or less Kurt's assessment after having put in 250 hours into a 3-hour documentary.
And by the way, just so you guys know, we're going to break down in layman's terms Eric Weinstein's theory of everything. But this is just the appetizers, okay? Just the appetizers before the main course. Roll tape. Let's watch this.
Thank you to Eric Weinstein. It's an avant-garde and creative theory. Kurt here, several months later. This has been so long in the making. Geez, you have no idea. Anyhow, I wanted to say that I mean what I just said. I may have said this before in the iceberg, and if I haven't, I should have because it bears repeating. I haven't seen a theory like this come from any single individual ever. Not one that's this fleshed out or has this amount of unexampled connections within itself, as well as to what's known as the theoretical physics backbone that we talked about earlier. And by the way, this is what I do for a living. I interview people on what theory they have of reality, whether it's of consciousness or it's physics-based or logic-based or what have you. So again, thank you to Eric and thank you to you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it.
Wow. And he's talked to a lot of physicists.
In particular, a lot of string theorists too.
Yeah.
And so, in part, I'm just in this very funny position where I now decide that I'm an entertainer because here's a joke.
No, I know.
What's the difference between a physicist and an entertainer? An entertainer has legal rights.
Well, I know, and I know you, and I love you, and one of the things we always talk about is you do live. It's a lonely existence because you live in your own head, and you're dealing with ideas and things that very few people can really appreciate or understand, including the creativity as a comic. I'm about to release my next special. And
congratulations.
Thank you. But at least I'm always getting affirmation. I'm out there. They're laughing. I'm building it. They're laughing. I do the special. I know how it's going to be received at least a little bit because I'm getting that kind of appreciation.
Sure.
After 4 decades of working in relative solitude
and abuse.
Yeah. And it's such an act of faith too, because when you have a world where when somebody like Ed Witten, et cetera, et al. Are saying that this is the only theory, everything else is a lie.
Right.
The act of faith it must take to continue on is because what if nobody ever sees it? That's why you get this guy like Kurt Jiongal who now takes all that time to actually understand it and highlight it and put it out there. How has that been received?
Tell me.
Yeah.
It's like the community doesn't want to react to it. And by react, I mean something very special. Like you saw this thing with Terrence Howard and myself that Joe asked for.
Yes, you were so nice to him. Maybe too nice.
I never want to critique somebody if I can't steelman them first. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong with a community that wants to pretend that a Harvard PhD and an MIT postdoc can't be steelmanned. Is this the first theory in the history of mathematics and physics that can't be steelmanned? That's a really bizarre question.
Yeah.
So, 1 second. I think about it this way. What are the odds that somebody with my profile would work 40 years and there's nothing to recommend what they work on? Zero. There's nothing good that can be said about it. I can tell you that Terrence Howard's idea of sticking 6 pentagonal housings for propellers through the edges of a regular tetrahedron is an ingenious idea for a drone. I don't need Neil deGrasse Tyson to pat me on the back. I don't have to call up my friends in an aerospace department. I can say, if nobody else has had that idea, he figured out that 108 degrees inside of a pentagon is almost 109.47, which is what you get for the interior angles of a tetrahedron. And he took that tiny discrepancy and he said that can be handled at an engineering level. And he built a drone with 6 degrees of freedom. So it has pitch, yaw, and roll. And it also has X, Y, and Z spanning something called the affine group. Now, my
Terrence
feeling...
Howard did that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah. And I'm going to catch all this nonsense off the internet, which is like, that charlatan Terrence Howard, you were too nice. He had nothing. And another group of people is going to say, you were such an arrogant prick.
Of course, you can't win.
Of course. But my point is in neither of those things. There essentially are no theories that can't be Steelmanned.
Right. Of course.
Right.
A great author, the difference in a great novel. The reason that the Brothers Karamazov is a great novel is because Ivan, who is the atheist, is very hard to argue with. But The Grapes of Wrath, great novel, but considered a good novel because you never get the point of view of the orange growers. The people that own the orange groves, we never see them. They're just these demons that are milking the poor Dust Bowl migrants. But it would have been a great novel.
You're going to ruin Upton Sinclair for me for sure.
I know. Well, this is actually Steinbeck. That's Steinbeck.
No, I know.
Yeah, but you mean The Jungle?
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's the same thing. There's the bad guy's so bad, but any great movie is the bad guy gives you a monologue and you get his point of view. Oh, well, started out as a kid.
This is my take on Sorkin's version.
A Few Good Men?
Colonel Jessup has as good of a point as Lieutenant Caffey.
We live in a world of walls, son. Yeah.
Well, it's undone by a flaw, right? So he gives this final soliloquy. He's like, he says something about, you sleep under the blanket of freedom that I provide, not that we provide. Right. And so this is Moses' sin, where Moses takes responsibility for bringing water from the stone for which he's prohibited to enter Israel.
That's right.
And so, in a weird way, we don't remember that the reason that A Few Good Men is a great film and a brilliant play, really, is that Jessup and Caffey are evenly matched. It's not that one has the right point, one has the wrong point.
That's exactly right. And that's such a good point because we ultimately, viscerally, I sided with Jessup. The man side of me was like, yeah, that guy's a bitch, but hold on. Still, you killed him. And
well, the thing is, I wanted somebody on that wall. I needed somebody on that wall that wasn't him.
Yes, but I don't mind having Jessup on that wall, but you have to remember that the reason that we don't have a warrior class that takes precedence over all the other classes is because the warrior class is there to protect our gentler spirits, the people that actually can't handle the hazing and things like that. I mean, you can't make the protectors the end all and be all. The protectors are there to allow for what would be considered, I suppose, civilian rule. The argument would be you have the most powerful army in the world in some ways because you have a powerful and strong and creative culture. You can't have a powerful, strong, creative culture if it's just a Spartan culture. You need Athens. You need Athens to protect. You need Spartans to protect Athens, I suppose, is the way I looked at it.
Wouldn't you think of Jessup as likely to be a cultured man in a narrow vein where he probably read Marcus Aurelius? Like, there's no question in my mind that Jessup is a thinker. And the weird thing is that he's cheated of war. He's forced to stay on this base in this tense situation that is not actually hot.
I would say that I don't know that he's a cultured man, but I think that in order to be a warrior, you need not be confused about the gray area between right and wrong, good and evil. Your enemy is your enemy, and you're in the business of killing or imposing your will or neutralizing your enemy. It's a nasty business, but you need a born enforcer.
I think the problem is he's cheated of war. And he's in a military edging situation where he has to eat his breakfast within in the crosshairs of a Cuban who's trained to kill him, but nothing's actually happening.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
And so, in fact, part of the problem is he's saying, look, I know who I'm supposed to be, and there's just no war for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's kind of like a Ferrari engine with no racetrack, you know.
That's right.
You know what Freud said about that? I think it was I can't remember. Freud was having a correspondence with I can't remember the philosopher, and he said, oh God, who was it? It was, I think Freud said, if you don't allow man to go to war, he'll go to war on himself. You know, and then the idea was that men don't go to war for hate. They don't go to war because they hate the enemy. They go to war because they love what they're protecting. And if you want to get young men to fight valiantly, if you want to get young men to die for a cause,
Right.
you need symbols for them to march under. You need slogans. You need that sort of, you need something that they can get behind. And it's usually love of country.
Or well, entertainment. And I think that one of this
I don't know if that sustains.
It's a very interesting question. So P.J. O'Rourke has a beautiful passage where he says that someone experienced what used to be called the drunk delight of battle before we decided that war was a bad thing.
The drunk delight of battle.
Yeah.
Well, that's but when the young men marched off to the Civil War and certainly World War I.
Yeah.
Not so much World War II, but certainly World War I. They had plumes in their hats and they were excited to go to war. It was valiant. There was something, you know, any young warrior thinks of themselves as on the side of right, and there's a romance to it. The problem is war mocks that. I mean, when you used to talk to somebody who's been in war makes a mockery of whatever you thought was right and wrong, or whatever you thought was good guys, bad guys kind of stuff. Well, it's certainly about honor and courage and all those things.
So certain kinds of warfare are incredibly demoralizing. So the bouncing Betty that was developed, I think, by the Germans was feared because of the kind of injury that inflicted. Something that would kill you would be different than something that would
maimed you,
in a particular way. And you know, in a weird way, I think that dueling, in a way that was unlikely to be fatal. So the two people could fire at each other and experience the thrill of likely not dying,
right?
Or dueling to first blood.
Yeah, in fact, they used to shoot kind of over each other's.
Well, there's something called deloping. I mean, now that you bring it up, it's a word that I never get to use, where you fire your shot into the ground, you throw it away, saying, "I have no desire to kill you, but I have no desire to cower either." Yeah,
that's.
So this was. Well, this is why the manly world of the manosphere is all up, because in essence we've got a bunch of people trying to figure out how to be men in a time that has had a lot of peace since 1945.
Well, this is Texas, my friend. This is I train with all these guys. Well, I mean, you move to Texas, you've got a copy of the Constitution in your back pocket. You grow an aggressive beard. You get better at jiu-jitsu. You've got a freezer full of game meat.
And tell me something.
Yeah.
When a guy with an AR-15 shows up in Uvalde, what do the men do with the guns?
Well, in Texas, you're supposed to rehearse that scenario. And you rehearse it not just with live rounds, but with dummy rounds. So if something jams, you learn how to expel your magazine.
Right. But what I'm trying to say is that a mom took off her heels, hopped a fence, and rescued her kids from an active shooter situation because Texas wasn't Texas.
Right. That's right.
Right.
Well, yeah.
So we've all learned this way. Boy, from where I come from, you talk like that, it's a short ride. Right. Well, mostly that's TV. Now, I'm not saying that.
Well, I have a joke about that, which is, carrying a gun, which I could do in Texas. Frankly, it's a little heavy. It's a little heavy, and it also digs into my spleen when I'm sitting down. And also, I'm not responsible, so I have a house full of children. And the joke, but it's true, is within 3 days, if I started carrying a gun, I would go, "Where is my gun?" Which is not a good question to ask when you've got kids in the house. So. Texas, not Texas, or most of us figure it's just a lot to carry. it's just heavy. After a while, you just become paranoid, and chances are it's not going to come to that and stuff like that. Now, yes, I do practice shooting because in my mind, I want to be the guy who can be like, get down, it's okay, everybody. Problem with that also is I've had a lot of warriors and police officers and guys who've been inoculated to the stresses of combat, tier 1 operators who say, hey, Bri, here's the problem. If you've got a gun and there's an actor shooter situation and you're squeezing off rounds, the cop's going to shoot you thinking you're the guy. There's a lot of things that you haven't thought
never
about.
Considered.
Never
and
considered.
You're going to figure it out the first time you need it.
Another guy did this to me. He said, I said, well, if I'm with my kids in a mall, I want to be able to, what's a good gun to carry? And he just stopped and he said, if you're with your kids at the mall, huh? What's a good gun? How do you see this playing out? I go, if I see a guy with a gun and I got my kids there, I want to take him out before he takes me out. And he said, yeah, okay. Well, go ahead, show me what you would do. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, just draw and shoot. So I go to draw and shoot. He grabs both legs and he starts pulling both legs in 2 different directions. He said, your kids are going to be holding on to you, pulling you one way, and the other kid's going to be pulling the other. Either way, they're going to be holding on to you.
To say nothing.
You didn't think about that, did you?
Of the drywall problem.
All of it.
Yeah.
And I went, oh man, I never thought about that. He goes, yeah, you want to get serious about this, you got to train for it like anything else.
This is the problem, I think. And by the way, this is why I'm really enthusiastic about this force-on-force simunition.
Yeah, I've done it.
Because they're actually converting your firearm into a de facto airsoft. And
yeah, well, I haven't done the airsoft, but I did do a scenario where there are screens and they have an electric, like literally a taser on your back. And if you get shot, you get tased.
Pain penalty.
Dude, my cortisol, I got addicted to it though, because my adrenaline was through the roof.
This is the problem with fetishes.
All right, we've already digressed. I need to get back to Eric Weinstein's theory of everything. So this guy makes this video. I want to know, can you give us, is there any way you can, yes. Because I know that my producer Dylan is chomping at the bit. He wants to know the secrets to the
Is he in the chair or you? I say screw Dylan.
I love it. You're right.
Okay.
You free me. Eric Weinstein, you are my wings.
And you complete me. Listen. What happened was that while Kurt and I were sitting outside of this conference, Kurt would say, okay, how does your theory handle the 3-generation problem? Why are there 3 copies that matter? I said, here it is in 5 minutes. So I gave him the answer. Then he said, well, how does it handle the cosmological constant problem? So I gave him the answer. Then he said, okay, why are there 16 particles in a generation? Gave him the answer. Why SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, the groups, the symmetries that generate the forces? Everything was about 5 minutes. And so he's like, how is this possible? And I said, I don't honestly know what's going on. He clearly has background in mathematical physics. I think from the University of Toronto. He says that on his program. I don't think he has a PhD. I don't think he had an advisor. I also didn't have an advisor. I did get a PhD, but I think he probably stopped before. And then he got curious, and then he disappeared. And then out of nowhere, he appears, and he's got this mock-up of my theory on his screen.
So he took a couple of months to go down that rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Man.
And then he's like, holy cow.
It checks out.
And now it's, okay, so now you've got 2 non-professors roaming around the internet who are seeing sort of the same thing.
2?
Well, me
right,
and him.
And Kurt.
Yeah. And the community still isn't listening. And I'm trying to say to the community, in some sense, you're in receivership. You're in intellectual receivership. Ever since you caught the quantum gravity flu, and you've been talking about nothing other than the one true theory, and there's no other game in town. We all have to quantize gravity because this is the holy grail. All of this is total nonsense. And it really began in 1983, 84 with one individual who was just so intellectually dominant that he steered the entire field towards his set of questions.
With that one speech, University of Pennsylvania.
No, that was that was the thing where I'm in my freshman year, I guess, at Penn. So it's very unusual. Right. It's more unusual for a freshman to be in a physics seminar than it is for me to be 16 or 17.
Right.
But I'm young. I have no idea where I am. I'm going to seminars thinking that this is like normal, which I guess it wasn't. And I see this thing where Ed Witten at the seminar famously says, as every quantum field theorist knows, the operator product expansion, this, that, and the other thing, blah, blah, blah. And the guy next to me turns to me and he says, I've been a quantum field theorist for 40 years. I don't know any of this shit. That's how profound it was.
God.
Right?
God. Witten. He's still around?
Oh, yeah.
Where is he at?
He's, I think, forcibly retired from the Institute for Advanced Study because they have a retirement age at 70. He has not been as dominant recently.
Have you tried to contact him?
He and I had 2.5, 3 conversations that really mattered, where each time we went up against each other and some bizarre thing happened, because I don't know a fraction of what that guy knows, and I can't do a fraction of what that guy can do, but I do know what I believe. And normally what he does is he just says, well, as every grade school child knows, and then he says something and people don't want to look dumb, so they say, of course. And I say, no, that's not true, because I'm autistic. So in 1985 he tried to prove that something called a Kaluza-Klein theory couldn't exist because the weak forces asymmetry precludes it due to something called the Atiyah-Hirzebruch theorem. So I went to his office in 85 and I had a conversation with him. And I said, everything was going great guns. I was going to go to Princeton, become a student. And he said, what are you interested in? I said, well, you wrote this article and I have an argument that you haven't contended with about why Kaluza-Klein theories can't exist. And he completely blew his stack.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. That always feels like insecurity to me.
Unclear.
Unclear is right. But can you, where do you deviate? What is it that you are saying that other physicists are not saying, especially quantum
First of all,
gravity?
I'm not a physicist. I'm an entertainer.
I know. You're a little more than that, Eric. You're a little more than that, but I appreciate it. But no, you're a little more than that. And you're just a theoretical mathematician dealing with things that are just ridiculous. So
just trying to get by.
You're just a guy trying to get from point A to point B. You ever hear? I think it was who was the Coburn, the old who played bad guys, James Coburn.
James Coburn.
And he said, I don't play bad guys. I just play a regular guy trying to get from point A to point B the best way I know how. And if I got to take a couple shortcuts, so be it. Great way to describe a bad guy, right? So you're just trying to get from point A to point B. You're just an entertainer. Can you give us, is there any way to explain this to us?
Yeah, there is. There
really?
is. Sure.
Where I could understand it?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give me what your rebuttal is and then give me an.
Well, let me just sort of give you the main ideas. So I just gave a talk at UC San Diego in the cosmology physics seminar. And I gave a formula for the dark energy. Now, in Einstein's setting, he worked on something called the space of metrics. So imagine that you know who Einstein is. You know that general relativity is his great work. But you're probably confused. You think E equals mc squared is his major innovation, which it isn't.
It's not?
No. No, there's something called the Einstein field equations, which looks like capital G mu nu plus lambda times little g mu nu equals some constant times t mu nu. So if you've never...
I got it.
I'm just saying. Yeah. Well, but that should be your first clue. Something.
I'll go into a seizure right now.
Well, but that's the first indication that if I say that and you have a reaction, because I view you as a very generally interested person, something has to have gone terribly wrong if you think E equals mc squared is Einstein's big deal.
Yeah.
So just keep in mind that the things that I'm going to say after that have to do with the fact, think about physics as a giant mansion in which we give people this really weirdo guided tour where we don't let them visit almost any rooms. So I can go into any airport in the United States and there'll be somebody talking about the multiverse and entanglement and Schrodinger's cat, but there won't be anyone talking about why is SU3 the symmetry of the strong force, which is much more of an important, question in some ways than you'd have any idea gathering from the fact that nobody talks about it. Or the three generations of matter. You probably have never heard that there are three generations of matter.
No.
So this careful curation, both inside the field, where you're trying to tell everybody the only holy grail is to quantize gravity, we are going to make Einstein submit to the will of Bohr. That's the holy grail. That's a curation inside the field where we lead beginning graduate students through this particular mindset so that they won't be able to make progress for reasons that I don't understand. And then we do this other thing with the lay public, which is that we talk ad nauseum about entanglement and the double slit experiment and things of that nature and Schrodinger's cat. And as a result, nobody knows actually any physics. So I'm going to say things which will sound unfamiliar, but don't blame the messenger. I'm just telling you, Einstein formulated his theory on something called the space of Lorentzian metrics. So I want you to think about that as if we were in Italy and you're in Pisa. If you have a problem with a term in Einstein's equations, it's a little bit like your tower is leaning. If you see there as being a leaning tower of Pisa, you're likely to think, boy, they screwed up the tower. When you find out that there are other leaning, all the towers in Pisa lean, you start to think, oh, maybe it's the soil. Mm-hmm. So what I'm proposing is that we move Einstein's structure away from this thing that you've never heard of, the space of Lorentzian space-time metrics, and put it somewhere else called the inhomogeneous gauge group. Now, because you didn't know about the space of Lorentzian metrics, I'm not going to be able to talk to you so easily about that. What that really is a choice. So every instant of time that has a place and a time is called a space-time event. Mm-hmm. And at that space-time event, I've got three rulers in space, one watch that tells me how fast time is going. So that's four instruments. And then I've got six protractors, X versus Y, X versus Z, Y versus Z. And then weirdo protractors, time versus X, time versus Y, time versus Z. And that set of 10 objects, the three rulers, one watch, three regular protractors, and six, time. That is a space-time metric at a space-time event. So
that's its address.
Einstein said, okay, nature chooses one set of rulers, protractors, and watches according to this formula. And I'm saying, no. I think nature is working over the space of all possible rulers, all possible watches, and all possible protractors. And that means that if you take our four dimensions that we think we're in, so the three that we intuit, the extra one of time that Einstein told us to add, and now we add three rulers, one watch, three normal protractors, and three weird time versus space protractors, you get 14. My claim is you and I are actually in a 14-dimensional conversation. We don't perceive it that way.
So you're adding three dimensions to Einstein's.
I'm taking the four dimensions that Einstein gave us, and
which were space,
X, Y, Z, and T.
Okay.
So three of space, X, Y, and Z, and one of time.
Okay.
And I'm saying, now I want you to think about the instruments that we would use to measure those dimensions as dimensions themselves. So now, if you think about how you'd want to go to Alpha Centauri, this table is probably a wood or pseudo-wood table. However, it's possible that it could be a display screen. And if so, I would be able to do this. This was introduced, I think, around 2007,
maybe?
2006, 2003, something like that, at a TED Talk.
Right, I remember.
You can hear the audience gasp, and it's called multi-touch gestures. And this particular one is called pinch to zoom. So in part, my suspicion is that space-time is a model. It's not the territory. This is something psychonauts and people who take a lot of psychedelic drugs talk about. The map is not the territory.
Right.
So think about general relativity and the standard model as the map. And we've been so long in a world where the map of our physical world isn't changing that we now think we live in space-time. We don't realize that space-time is a model. And that model is almost certainly not right.
So it's a virtual reality in a way.
It's a distortion of reality that is the best distortion that we can work with mathematically.
This whole thing we're doing now.
You and I are doing a thing in the territory. But if you had to make a map of the territory, somebody would start talking about world lines through space-times. Imagine Bryan Callen was a point, or whatever.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're idealizing things.
I got to tell you, I don't even know how you even started conceiving of this. I don't even know how you start with this. I can't fathom how your brain works, that you're 14 dimensions. It's impossible for me to even understand how you got here.
But Bryan, if I started describing a problem in modern day Turkey,
yeah,
I know you very well. And what you'd do is you'd say, well, look, I think in many ways this problem has to do with the transition from the Ottoman Empire through Ataturk to a modern Muslim state in Asia Minor or whatever. And
so you're starting with a model, a rudimentary
So I'm
model.
trying to say somebody starts with the problem.
Yeah.
Like, what are you curious about the physical world? Do you want to go to the stars?
Personally, I don't concern myself with that stuff, but but I'm curious about plenty. Yeah.
Well, but why are we talking? I mean, what do you think this place is? What do you think we're made of?
That's the nostalgia for getting closer to the truth.
Right.
Seems to be as human as it gets. None of us want to be lied to. We all want to get closer to what's actually happening.
Not true. We
here.
do want to be lied to.
Well, probably because it's a lot more comfortable. But you're right about that. But really, none of us like to be lied to, really. I mean, at the end of the day, I'd like to be the one who knows. I mean,
I want to find out that the truth loves me just as much as the lies that I wish were true.
Yeah, or I'd like to know that the truth is something benevolent.
Yeah, sure.
Right, that there's a point to this. And when you talk about there being a point to this,
right,
the point is something good at the end of that day.
Well, so maybe you want to know God.
I think so.
Yeah. So my claim is that in general, you end up, when a child goes through that chain of why questions, they either accept a because as an answer, or they become a theoretical physicist or a mathematician.
That's great. That's so true. That is.
So I think that the natural state of a human is mathematics and physics. And everyone who is not a mathematician or physicist needs to explain, when did this become uninteresting to you?
When did this become uninteresting?
Yeah. Here you are in a miracle. You don't even know what you are. If I asked you, about, and I won't, I promise, but if I asked you, about the particles in your body, how much understanding do you have of the quarks, the protons, the neutrons, the gluons?
None.
So at some point, you're like, too rich for my blood. I'm out. So
but the understanding the meaningful difference between things is really the difference between being a person of knowledge and wisdom in a lot of ways. I mean, we knowing what the difference is, you have to work at that sometimes. You have to have at least a rudimentary understanding of music to really appreciate Mozart and Beethoven and the difference between Bach and whoever it might be, Schuller or whatever
Schubert, Schumann,
Schubert, whatever it is. But you know what I mean? Like like Thelonious Monk. Why was he such a great pianist?
He wasn't.
Why was Coltrane? Well, okay, so there you go. But he
was a great composer.
Okay, and when you hear Leonard Bernstein break down Beethoven, it's fascinating because he says the same thing about Beethoven.
He's nasty about Beethoven.
He's nasty, but he had this God-given understanding of the form. And when you hear that, you go,
oh, sorry.
Wow.
So I didn't know you're familiar with this. It's like a crazy thing where he says basically that on all sorts of metrics, Beethoven is meh.
Rudimentary. He's rudimentary.
And then he comes up with
a mess.
He comes up with some conclusion at the end that there's one thing that makes Beethoven special, which is like every note has a purpose or something.
Knowing what that next perfect note is. So he had an understanding of the form of it. It was this instinct, this intuitive understanding.
Have you ever heard his crazy introduction of Glenn Gould?
No.
The Brahms second piano concerto?
No, but I've seen it.
You've seen him discussing this?
No.
This is frightening.
I've seen Gould, though, wrestle with that, I think. And maybe I heard him talking about that.
I think it's recorded. And my recollection's been all
I
of
saw a
years.
documentary there's a documentary on Gould.
So apparently Bernstein comes out and says, you might want to know why I'm addressing the audience tonight. It's very rare that a conductor does this, but I have such respect for the soloist, Glenn Gould, that I am here to tell you that I completely disagree with his interpretation of the piece.
Bernstein was something else, man.
And then he says, now, the normal thing to do is to pretend to feign a conflict and allow a junior conductor to take over so that I don't have to be in conflict with my soloist. But so high is my esteem for Mr. Gould that I've decided to conduct this against my own better judgment in the fashion that he has specified, and I'll let you be the judge. And I was like, what? Well, this is when things mattered.
They mattered.
Right? And like you can imagine somebody's like, enough words, get to the music.
For all you anti-Semites out there, by the way, Gould and Bernstein were Jews, and so's this guy. So you guys are so smart. It must be. You know what?
Actually, I changed my name. I changed my name from McConnell for business reasons.
Eric McConnell. I don't know if he's that Scottish. This is weird. Yeah. The fix is in. And one of the things that bothered Beethoven is he couldn't compose a fugue, I guess. He was just always falling short of composing that fugue.
Fugue.
Yeah, he wanted to compose a fight. He felt like he was always falling short.
Oh, you mean feud?
Yeah,
okay.
YouTube Bernstein breaking Beethoven down. It's so great and it's so worth it. And what I loved about it is I'm editing my special now, and I mean, I just hate myself in general. I walk around feeling, I was in Austin, and I was walking around hating myself and feeling kind of shitty about myself. And I'm with my wife, and we're walking by this guy. I'm admiring his guitar.
Right.
They're playing right there, and I'm walking on 6th Street. And in the middle of his playing, he gets off stage, walks up to me, stops playing. It's a packed house. And he just goes, "You are my favorite comic. You make me laugh." So, and I was admiring him and feeling bad about myself, walking with my head down with the posture of a jumbo shrimp. And this guy comes over and shakes my hand. He's all full of sweat, gives me a kind of a bro hug. And I just went, man, I'll never complain about a damn thing in life. Because here I am just hating everything I do. And this guy got off stage to say in the middle of his playing. So at least I'm moving some people.
This just happened to me at a place called the Recording Club with a fabled drummer whose last name I can't say without butchering it. Vinny Cayuta, who's name checked on Frank Zappa's Joe's Garage. And legendary drummer because of his, I think, polyrhythmic and odd time signature ability. And I went into this recording club, and somebody said, Vinny's drumming right now. Like, you've got to be kidding. And I said, can I see? I said, sure. So I go into the actual studio. Now there's something about interrupting somebody when they're recording and actually walking into their sonic space. And Vinny sees me, and there's an intruder in his space, and he throws down the drumsticks. And he gets up and like, I have screwed up so badly this time. I am the worst worm in human history. He comes over and he says, Eric Weinstein? I said, you have any idea who I am? I said, you're Vinny Coyote? And he's like I'm like, dude, you're you.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's weird because when you appreciate niche people, like I'm very devoted, for example, to this guy, Ryan Williams, who's a scooter trick guy who does stuff off ramps.
I know Ryan.
Yeah, you know Ryan?
Yeah, he did our podcast.
Oh, when when Joe invited us for the UFC, we said hi to him.
Yeah, he did our podcast, Fighter and the Kid. Yeah.
Like him, Kai Lenny, all of these death-defying athletes. I want to say thank you for making me able to get up.
You got to do Andy Stump's podcast. Have you seen Andy Stump? Have you seen what he does in that squirrel suit? His world record was just broken.
I hate and love.
Why don't you take a look at his POV as he's diving through
a needle,
dude? Where the ground is here, and you can't miscalculate. You will get a nasty carpet burn that you're not going to walk away from. I mean,
one or two people survive their collisions with.
Yeah, one or two, and they're never the same. One guy got caught in a tree. Enjoy that shit.
Yeah.
Look,
the fascinating thing about this is that the reason that you don't start this sport is that you recognize that once you've tried skydiving, you need to do a squirrel suit. Once you do a squirrel suit, you need to fly closer and do proximity flying. Once you do proximity flying, you're trying out new courses under weirder conditions and effective your hedonic treadmills.
You got to keep the juice going. You got to keep upping the ante.
And that's what I think kills people in that sport.
It is, and they die. Go back to this is called the Trump weave. Let's go. Let me take you back for a second.
Yeah.
You have the delineation between your theory and Einstein's theory, and he was working on the theory of everything before he died, is that there are 14 points, not 11 points.
I'm taking Einstein more seriously than Einstein. And I'm saying that what he called space-time is a 4-dimensional sliver of a 14-dimensional space. And that something that he used to generate his equations, which was actually technically discovered by David Hilbert, which is like a penalty function for how good or bad a configuration of physical states is. We call it a Lagrangian or an action. And he used this thing called now the Einstein-Hilbert action. And my claim is that it's much closer to a combination between that action and something called the Chern-Simons action. Chern-Simons action is trapped in dimension 3. It only works in dimension 3, really. And I'm making the argument that Einstein showed us how to take a 4-manifold and make it behave as if it were a 3-dimensional space. So in a weird way, which unfortunately, without a whiteboard, I can't really explain it. He figured out how to take curvature and feed it back into the space of derivative operators using something called a contraction. Years later, S.S. Chern and Jim Simons of Renaissance hedge fund fame figured out how to take in dimension 3 curvature and feed it back into derivative operators using something else called a Hodge-Star operator. And in fact, what you need to do is you need to take the Chern-Simons idea, but also the Einsteinian contraction idea, and marry the two ideas in order to get the right gravity theory. So effectively, what I've said is, look, the problem isn't the equations so much per se. It's not the tower, it's Pisa that's the problem. It's the soil, not the engineering. And so I've tried to lift this thing and put it down in a new home. And in the process, I'm sort of downselling it. I am changing the equations. I'm changing the Lagrangians. This is new. It's not something that we already know. But it's not disconnected from our history. And for whatever reason, the community can't sit still to steelman it before figuring out what it wants to say is wrong. And I just don't, I genuinely don't grasp how Kurt Jiongal can have spent 250 hours producing a 3-hour documentary and nobody in the Priestley community can figure out word one as to what to say.
Well, it's complicated stuff, and you've got to have a real background. As you're talking, I'm wondering, is one of the instruments that you are taking into account the observer, consciousness?
Yeah.
It has to
be,
no,
it's
right?
not consciousness. The key question is, what is the observer?
What is the observer?
What is
Not who?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the old jokes is, who's the observer? Is it your father? Was his father the observer? Is it passed down
Yeah.
It's a weird way in which you're talking technically, and then you say this thing, and it's like, then the observer makes an observation and a measurement, and you're thinking, how did a human get into that story?
Yeah. Well, the observer's a difficult, let's just dissect that for a second, because you have the ability as an individual to actually observe yourself. You're able to, one of the things that meditators of the Vedanta and, these kinds of things practice is observing what is happening. So their meditation would be something like, I'm going to sit quietly and I'm going to just see what happens. So I'm going to watch the thoughts come into my mind. Mm. I'm going to watch my emotions, my body go through its emotions. My face will get hot, my heart will beat faster. I'm going to observe my physical body in this as a cloud of sensation, which you can do. And you can get very, very good at stepping out of that and watching all of that phenomena. So if you have anxiety, you can treat it almost like the same thing as when you burn your finger a little bit. It's just data. You just interpret the raw data of said thing. Now, then the question becomes, who's doing the observing? And we tie our identity so closely to our emotions, our physical body, and our minds, our thoughts, our memories. But what if there's somebody else watching all of that? And in fact, there is. And if you have any doubts about the power of that kind of exercise, see 1963 when that Buddhist monk was protesting. I think his name was the president of South Vietnam, who was a staunch Catholic, and protesting that president's treatment of Buddhists in his own country. And he lit himself on fire.
Perfectly still.
And didn't move. And I think it was David Halberstam from the New York Times who said, he just keeled over. I just heard the air expel from his lungs. And as his acolytes were crying. But that's a guy who had already left his body. That's a guy who was watching himself and had already left behind this avatar. So back to the observer, that's a hard thing to pin down.
It's a really beautiful illustration of a very tough point. I don't think I've ever heard that.
Well, this is where we get into this sort of the conversation about the observer.
Well, see, the problem is that there are different kinds of observations. So the next problem that I'm going to hit you with is, so you have a robot. You aren't a robot. You have something that has a metacognitive perch. And you observe your robot, the breathing, how flush your cheeks feel, et cetera, from your metacognitive perch. But now the question is, can you now observe your process from that perch and do the same trick that you did to your cheeks? Or does that thing resist observation? This is something I've discussed with Sam Altman, whether or not consciousness beyond large language models has to do with defeating a recursion property where how do you observe the observer observing the observer observing? That's a huge problem because if that doesn't self-terminate, it's like
Sam Altman studies Vedanta. So Sam Altman is very much in this camp. And if your guru or your gubai or whatever it is, will tell you that later on, as you start to cultivate the observer, I think it's called Sakti, you will then very subtly start practicing observing the observer.
All right.
This is where to your point.
Well, so my claim is that either you're going to do something, which is to introduce something called a recursion limit, which is what stops.
We get to the point where the mirrors.
Well, if I ask you what is 1 divided by 3 to infinite precision as a fraction, as a decimal,
never ends.
You're supposed to say, I've given you 12 digits and it's enough already.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the computer breaks. Or you could try to say, look, I'm going to observe the process of generating that fraction and let that be the observation. So I don't know how this gets settled. But ultimately, there are multiple problems of observation in human life. And some of them are biochemical, some of them are physical. And my claim is that gravity is the observer. That is,
gravity is the observer.
Yeah. That a choice, an Einsteinian choice of 3 rulers, 1 watch, and 6 protractors is the act of observing the 14-dimensional space.
The choice
Yeah.
of using those.
You may not know which ones you've chosen, but you see,
How is that gravity?
So imagine that Einstein has already convinced the world who follows general relativity that the choice of a Lorentzian metric is what generates gravity. That's something that you can blame me for not being a good explainer, but that is what's in the world currently. My claim is, if you think about this room, you might be led into error saying, what's the temperature in the room? Oh, it's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, is it 68 degrees Fahrenheit everywhere in the room? How would you sample the various temperatures that are in the room? So imagine that you had, for example, a string of thermometers, and you had the string somehow arrayed through the room. You'd get a different reading at every point, and there'd be some variation. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd have a sheet of thermometers, and depending upon how high, low, bent, curved, you'd get a bunch of readings across the sheet. Well, that's effectively what I'm saying, is that you have some 4-dimensional object, which seems to generate the universe, and then you have a choice of how to attach 3 watches, 3 rulers, 1 watch, and 6 protractors to that.
You have a choice of how to measure it.
Right. Well, no, how to get a collection of measuring devices. You have different measuring, like this could be a foot, this could be a foot. You know, you have to decide what a foot is in the X direction, what a foot is in the Y direction.
Funny, when you write a script, you've got to decide at what point of the story do you want to start.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an analogy, but you've got to kind of say, why on this day have we started the story now? You know.
Okay, well, if you wanted to do it in screenwriting, you might say that according to Save the Cat, there are 40 beats in a film on average, and each beat is a measure of the change in the emotional cadence of a screenplay.
You're just such a polymath, and I can't believe you read Save the Cat. You see what I'm saying? The guy just knows, like literally, you want to talk about anything, and he's Blake Schneider. And yeah, by the way, Save the Cat. That's
well, no, but I'm just trying to meet you where you are.
No, I know, and I get it. But so
my claim
gravity,
is
let's go back to gravity.
So gravity is a choice of rulers, watches, and protractors. And I'm saying, no, look at all of the rulers, all of the watches, all of the protractors on the 4-dimensional space. Take them in their totality, not just the ones that Einstein say get picked out by the equation.
How do you choose all those? Where are they? Why did you come up with a bunch of different ones?
Well, this is what I'm trying to say about your temperature reading, is that if you look at your Nest thing on the wall and it says 68 degrees, where's that sensor?
You're suggesting that there are different temperatures in this room. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a little weird that we've chosen one.
But you figured out a way, at least according to your equations, to measure all the temperatures in the room.
Well, no, I'm saying, first of all, that the particles that we are not dancing on a 4-dimensional stage. They're dancing on a 14-dimensional stage. And, if you and I both go to we both take our daughters to see Taylor Swift, okay? I'm behind a post, and you've got floor seats.
Yeah, that's right. Damn right. Sorry, I just like to assert dominance because I don't like how smart you are. So if anywhere I can get a little edge, but keep going, I'm right there. Yeah, she's waving to me probably.
So you asked me, how was the show? Like, lousy. How was the show? It was awesome. Yeah. Same show, but somehow we sampled that show from 2 very different places. Or for example,
it's such a great way to put it, because if I'm in a plane flying over Belize versus being on the ground in Belize,
right?
It's just 2 very different. It's just when I look at a piano, it's a box until it's touched the right way, and then it's a piano.
Well, you could think about another version of this, The Matrix. I think it was maybe it was The Matrix first sequel. you had the computer compose the scenes with enough three-dimensional information that they could then try lots of different virtual cameras going through the scene. So the scene always happened the same way, but there were so many different possibilities for how to record it.
Yeah.
And so in effect,
it's where you're standing and the question you're asking, right?
Well, the claim is that scene existed with 3 dimensions worth of information, and the final cut of the film was one choice of a traveling path of a camera, of a virtual camera. So effectively, we've been blinded from our 14-dimensional reality, if I'm correct, by the fact that this appears always as 4 dimensions. So if you imagine that you're let's say you're in a submarine, and you've got a periscope. A periscope is a device from taking data from the above the surface world and creating a 2-dimensional image that you can see. So you can point it at a polar bear, maybe there's an orca dorsal fin, and there's a glacier calving or whatever. All of those things are choices about how to point the periscope. We don't know what's making this choice effectively, but I believe that what's going on is that you and I are dancing in 14 dimensions, and we're taking some 4-dimensional slice and saying that's reality.
And is that because of our limited visual and sensory apparatuses?
I don't think so. I think it's fundamental to the math.
It's fundamental to the math. So what I'm saying is that
we are the composite of a 4 and a 14-dimensional space.
We are a composite of that. But then why are...
First of all, when I say we, there's a general issue that I have with physics, which I don't know how to get around, which is that I believe that we get very narcissistic when it comes to physics. We want physics to be about us at a deep level.
Yeah.
And I see no indication that physics is about us. So we experience it, we are made of it, it is everything that we know, but it doesn't seem to deeply care about us. And so what I'm claiming is that the mathematics that lead to this world, as I understand it, it starts off with 4 dimensions, but with no rulers, no protractors, and no watches. And then it grows the space of all possible rulers, watches, and protractors. So 4 begets 14 out of itself. Mm-hmm. So I call this endogenous dimensions. It's not extra dimensions you're slapping on. The 4 dimensions contain the blueprint for the 14. So think about it.
It's almost a model for the 14.
Would you say that a fertilized egg is almost a model for a blastosphere? And then would you say that a blastosphere is...
Yeah, it's a little bit like I could take a piano and scatter it on the ground and call it a piano. Technically it is, but it's not until it's in its form and it knows how to be touched the right way. I guess...
There are very few things that construct themselves.
Yes, that's right. Aristotle said that. If something about... If wood making was in nature, then ships would occur in nature. I mean, if the wood making was inherent to the wood, then ships would exist.
Well, this is why the unmoved mover is like a boundary condition.
Right.
And so what I'm claiming is I'm not here to solve or try to solve or pretend to solve. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's way above my pay grade. My quest was, what is the minimal something that one has to assume to get everything?
What is the minimal something? Yes.
The minimal something appears to be 4 degrees of freedom. So roughly speaking, treble, mid, bass, and reverb, or salty, sweet, sour, and bitter. Any 4 degrees of freedom. Let's get more John and a little bit less Ringo.
Isn't that sort of Francis Bacon's thing, though? Wasn't Bacon's contribution the idea that you can understand the universe using models, using rudimentary models? So if this works this way on this small scale, that's probably how the entire universe works. I mean, wasn't that the beginning of that, or am I off?
I don't really know.
Okay, good. I like it. Eric, I'll educate you on Francis Bacon. But modeling...
As a Jew, I have to avoid bacon.
That's a good point. But modeling and models
Although I hear it's delicious.
It's very nice. Yeah, listen, I'm going to force some bacon down your throat. I'll disguise it as sushi. That is sort of, you've got to start with a model to explain how the rest of the whole shebang works. It's all we have.
Well, to be blunt about it,
Yeah.
I don't know where this is going to end up. Assume that I've made a terrible, catastrophic error and I'm boring your audience with what is effectively a bizarre Ahab-like tale of chasing a whale. Then it's interesting because it's interesting that a guy can spend 40 years avoiding all sorts of things that would have brought, much more advantage to his family just to do this. But let's assume for the moment that it's actually sane. I don't think there's a comparable experience. Most things have a precedent. So you'll notice that nobody searches for land masses anymore. It was very interesting that in Gilligan's Island, the theme song says, "The ship sunk ground on the shores of this uncharted desert isle." Like, what do you mean, uncharted desert isle? Yeah. So the last landmass, I love this question, and maybe I've used it on podcasts before, but do you know what the last landmass to be found was?
I don't think so.
Isn't that an interesting question? Do you know when?
I mean, my guess would be something like Antarctica, which is an ocean.
I think it's early 20th century.
Yeah.
And it's some island, some sizable island off the coast of Siberia.
Yeah.
So certain games come to an end. Nobody thinks I am going to be the first person to find new land on Earth. This hasn't happened yet. One of the problems with trying to do a theory of everything, which again is not a theory of everything, the technical trade name theory of everything refers to a complete set of rules for the universe, not a knowledge of what can be done with those rules. So imagine that you learn chess by observing people, and you've never seen, for example, an en passant move. You're like, wait a minute, I didn't know that the pawn could do that. And then you try it again. You're like, no, it only can do that if it hasn't moved previously or something like this. And then you see castling. You're like, what is up with this crazy stuff? And then you see somebody, a game timeout because two people haven't captured a piece and they've just been chasing each other around the chessboard. So you learn more and more rules and they get more and more exotic as you go out.
Right.
When you finally know the last rule of chess so that you're not going to be surprised, every top player knows all the rules of chess. And there are even these things, I don't know if you ever know about chess jokes. Chess jokes are when there's a badly specified rule and somebody will make up a position to show that that rule isn't clear enough. When you finally know all the rules of chess, you have a theory of everything for chess. It doesn't mean you can play chess at all. You might be lousy, but at least you're not going to be surprised. Wait, you move two pieces at once? Well, that's just castling.
Yeah. In fighting, that they talk about that. Like a veteran's seen all the looks. He's seen every look. Like you've got your trips, you've got your judo, you've got your sambo, you've got your Greco, you've got your freestyle wrestling, you've got your striking, you've got your kicking, you've got your Muay Thai, you've got your Dutch kickboxing. You've seen a lot of looks. You're not going to fool a veteran. All that fancy shit isn't going to work.
Well, but look, it
doesn't
is
mean you're
highly
unlikely. Doesn't mean you're going to be a
unlikely.
champion, but you can
Highly unlikely. But imagine that somebody says, "Oh, you've never seen the spinning nose before? You've seen elbows."
Yeah.
No, it's a go for broke move. It's very, very rare.
That's right. It's called the woodpecker. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Dylan's telling me we got to wrap this up.
Oh,
but I could talk forever.
Let's have another session where we actually talk more about this thing, what its import is. I'm sorry if I was digressive.
It's great.
I would like to just say one thing, which is that both you and I have talked about feeling that neither the Democratic machinery nor the Trump machinery represents most Americans and what most people want for the country, ourselves, and our future. And I just think it's very dangerous that, in part, whatever just happened politically polarized the country to such an extent that that shared concept of America is almost nowhere to be found because these sort of two camps drain all of the oxygen in the room from anything moderate and decent that isn't focused on some sort of purity, whatever. And right now, you and I are sort of in a world in which the podcasting thing that we both do is playing an outsized role. Very helpful for correcting the systemic distortions of mainstream and legacy media, but incredibly dangerous in terms of not presenting the forefront of thought, that effectively you'll have choices that we make. And, one of the things that I see and you see is that we know tons of people who are super interesting that aren't on the podcast circuit with points of view that if they were on the podcast circuit, might change the world. But by virtue of the fact that you see the same people interviewed over and over again and on the same topics, somehow somebody has to figure out how to use podcasting to explore the great unspoken for.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do. I'd love to do it with you, because your guidance would be,
It's not guidance. We're two guys fumbling around. I mean, one of the things that I just very much appreciate is that when I moved back to Los Angeles after 37 years away, you took it on yourself to be the one-man welcoming committee. And one of the things that you wanted to indicate to me is just how intellectually dynamic this supposedly vapid city is, which is an old belief of mine that basically it's posing as the entertainment capital, but entertainment has to hire all sorts of geeks to get everything right. Plus, it's an aerospace city built on an oil field, and people just don't see the actual city that has Caltech, UCLA, and all of these just wonders here. So it would be great fun to explore that with you. And
I agree, Eric, because I think the liability of podcasts is that it's very hard for a regular comedian, whoever it might be, myself and everything, to know when they're being fed a lie or something that's been rebutted by the mass consensus of science or whatever it might be. So you allow that person to continue to talk after they've made a claim. And we kind of accept that claim without saying, hey, I know about this. Sorry, I got to stop you. Where'd you come up with that conclusion? Well, that bucks against everything. And that's where expertise actually does matter.
Well, and just to riff, there's that. But now there's like a new, really significant problem that I don't know how to discuss, which is experts have allowed themselves to lie in relatively narrow areas of consequence. And the finding out that experts have this division between the esoteric and the exoteric. The exoteric is what they show the world, and the esoteric is what they privately believe. So, for example, scientists who were focused on COVID exoterically did not contradict the public health apparatus, and in particular the attempt to localize the origin of COVID to the wet market rather than to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Why? Because in general, everybody knew that their funding was potentially dependent on them falling in line. So you have these experts who are made precarious. There's a fad for saying, oh, a bunch of cowards. Okay, well, if you're willing to take your kids out of school and to not make your mortgage payments, like these boys do not play nice and they don't mess around. They'll just destroy your life and your ability to function.
That's right.
And what we've done is we've allowed our scientists to lie to the public in a very narrow area to support this sort of out of control national security complex or this very large agreements on public health and all of these things. And in that world, we don't realize, no, the experts are much less confused, but they are being squeezed. You don't realize how precarious a virologist is. And by making our scientific class, which I consider to be our deadly ninja priests, precarious, they are no longer able to serve the public interest. What we've done right now with the Trump people coming in is that they have the attitude of, what scientists? Well, Fauci showed us that science is bullshit. And
throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah.
I mean, it's a tremendous amount of baby and very little bathwater. And do I agree that the bathwater is fetid and horrific? Yeah, it's terrible. And the way that you got there is that you allowed previous administrations to make science a worse and worse and worse career path for Americans who would stand up, who would be courageous, and who would say no. And so one of the things that I'm dying to do is to stop the idea that either there's no problem with our experts, clearly there's a problem with our experts, and the issue of, are there no experts? Are you stupid? Do you really believe there are no experts? Do you really believe that wealth and power doesn't get the best diagnostician when a family member is sick? Do you not believe that these guys know who to hire if their family member is kidnapped overseas? Yeah, there are experts everywhere. And you have a claim on them as an ordinary podcast listener, and you're being driven to hate your own experts who serve you.
That's right.
So that you will punish them, and then they will just say, screw the public.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I know.
I'm worried about the demonization of Big Pharma. Big Pharma is, they do a lot of things that are unethical, but you got to know, you can't attack these things with a blunt instrument. You need to know how these things, you need to know how the U.S. government actually works. It's a very complicated organism. So that we can take a sledgehammer to it, you might be getting rid of some very important stuff. Yeah. I don't want to get rid of the Department of Energy. They've got scientists that track the weapons-grade uranium in the world.
It's not the Department of Energy. It's the Department of Physics. And we call it the Department of Energy because Carter, I think, created it out of the AEC.
Exactly. They're pretty much apolitical people, a lot of them.
Well, and then we put somebody who having gender dysphoria issues in charge of our nuclear waste, which was a disaster, and that means that
and a thief, by the way, a criminal.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, when you have to, you can't just go and buy women's clothes as a dude.
You can't just wear them on the internet.
Yeah, you have to steal them from
for God's sake,
baggage carousels.
Yeah.
But look, another thing that we have a friend that we mutually love in Joe, and my feeling is that it's now gotten to a point where Joe has to take responsibility for how powerful he's become. And I don't think he likes that because he still identifies as the guy who just makes fart jokes into a webcam, which is how he got his start. So he built this thing from nothing, and now he's inherited responsibility that I don't think that he wants.
I feel that way about like Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg, who were just trying to figure out a way to get people to communicate and stuff, and all of a sudden we're saying, hey, you're causing the people in Burma, the Rohingya are being massacred using your Facebook technology by spreading false stories. Whoa, what's your safety team going to do about it?
Same thing with Elon.
Right, same thing.
Right, same thing with Sam Altman.
I didn't know that was happening.
All of these people.
Frankenstein.
But in our situation, one of the things that I think is really important is that sometimes Joe pushes back on me slightly when I'm not around. He's always very kind. But I think that we have to figure out some better way of adjudicating what's serious and what isn't. So, for example, the reason I did the Terrence Howard thing is that Terrence Howard has one incontrovertible genius level contribution to make, and I was happy to take it. If he didn't, I wouldn't have done it.
Right.
But I was kind of just shocked. Like I said, on this thread, hey, can you guys check out, like, the biggest thing in 40 years has happened to me, and there wasn't that much interest. Now you have a situation in which whatever Joe finds fanciful or interesting that day has an outsized influence. Yeah. And I'm struggling with this myself. I have focused on all sorts of ways in which heterodoxy actually has a really good point. And now I've got a bunch of people in power previously that I was talking to a lot, my friends, I think, still, who are not being informed by our best understanding of the world, that effectively this is broken into loyalty clusters. Are you loyal to MAGA? Are you loyal to DEI? My feeling is, as an American, we're not in America until I don't have to kiss a ring and I don't have to bend a knee and I don't have to pretend that I can't see what I can see. And I'm not.
You said the strength of America is being able to give your leaders the finger.
Yes, and in my opinion, it's much better. There's no reason to give a leader the finger who says, "Here's the plan. Here's what I think we're going to do. We need strong leadership. I need to hear now from the dissenting voices. What do you have?" I'm not seeing that, and this is terrifying to me. If dissent is not a part of MAGA, we're toast, because dissent cannot be allowed inside of DEI. Both of these things are in danger of becoming authority cults.
Well, that's right. I mean, loyalty, when loyalty is everything, you're not going to get what you're going to do. If you're a ruler who demands total and complete loyalty, you're going to create a circle of liars around yourself.
And partially what we're seeing is the emergence of an idea that in order to show your freedom in the new world, you should find something taboo to do repeatedly. So the most mild form of this is to use the word retarded every 4 seconds.
That's true.
And the much more disturbing thing is that you dip into Nazi ideology and you say, there's a lot of great stuff in there that we've forgotten, like Carl Schmitt's friend-enemy dynamics. And the idea is that we need to keep people permanently polarized all the time, up, down, friend or enemy, left, right, no gray area. This is a terrifying development.
It is. And if you don't know how that repackaged terrible idea manifests itself, then you need to pick up a history book, but nobody has the attention span. And even then, it's like, whose history, and all this stuff. So it's a big problem. I wonder if you and I could figure out a way to push back on that a little bit.
Or to try to explore a different paradigm whereby, like, I don't view you as highly political. I don't view myself as...
Just try to stay responsible to the evidence. I try.
Just try.
I have my bias, but I try.
And you screw up.
All the time.
As do I.
All the time.
And so my feeling is that we need to model something new in podcast space. And I don't exactly know what, but I'd be willing to give it a try with you.
I would be so honored.
I'd be honored too.
I mean, just doing this, I could do this all day. I love it. And I really appreciate you coming out and doing this. I know you have to get to your kickboxing class, and I don't want to take time away from that. Why are you laughing?
Pardon me?
Nothing.
I've given up on Muay Thai years ago.
Oh, you did?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Now it's just jiu-jitsu. Now it's just grappling, or
What?
is it dance?
Yeah, it's violent ballet.
It's violent ballet. I forgot about that. You should see his tour jeté. It ends with a wheel kick, and it's fascinating.
7th position.
I gave it away. We do this stuff underground. You guys aren't privy to that kind of stuff.
Brian, thanks for having me.
I just want more always. And your theory of everything is, I'm looking forward to, to be continued.
To be continued.
Chapter 2.
Thanks, brother.
It could be considered